The dust had barely settled on Thomas Gardner's grave when the first stranger came knocking at Florence Gardner's door with a proposition that made her stomach turn. She stood in the doorway of the small ranch house outside Williams, Arizona Territory, her black mourning dress already covered in a fine layer of desert dust, staring at the paunchy land speculator who smelled of whiskey and entitlement. It was August 1882, the sun hung mercilessly overhead, and her husband had been dead for exactly 9 days. "Madam, I understand you're in a difficult position," the speculator said, his eyes roaming past her into the modest home. "A woman alone can't manage a cattle operation. My offer is generous considering the circumstances." Florence felt her jaw tighten. At 24 years old, she had already buried one child in infancy and now her husband. She was tired of circumstances. "The ranch is not for sale, Mr. Pemberton. It will never be for sale. Good day." She closed the door firmly, then leaned against it, her hands trembling. The house felt enormous and suffocating all at once. Thomas had been thrown from a spooked horse, his neck broken instantly. One moment she had been a wife with dreams of expanding their small herd, and the next she was a widow with 40 head of cattle, 160 acres, debts at the general store, and absolutely no idea how she would manage the autumn roundup alone. Through the window, she watched Pemberton climb into his buggy, his face red with indignation. He would not be the last, she knew. Vultures circled wounded prey, and she was bleeding from wounds no one could see. The afternoon stretched long and lonely. Florence tried to busy herself with mending, but her hands could not stay steady. She had cried herself hollow in the first days after Thomas's death, and now she felt like a husk, dried out and brittle. They had only been married for 3 years, having met when she came west from Missouri with her parents. Thomas had been kind, hard-working, and steady. Their love had been the quiet sort, built on shared work and mutual respect rather than grand passion. Still, she had loved him, and his absence left a void that echoed through every corner of the house. That evening, she forced herself to eat some bread and preserves, though it tasted like sawdust in her mouth. The cattle would need checking tomorrow. The windmill had been making an odd sound last week that Thomas had meant to investigate. The fence line on the eastern pasture needed mending. The list of tasks stretched endlessly before her, each one a mountain she would have to climb alone. She was sitting on the porch in the cooling dusk, watching the first stars emerge when she heard the sound of hooves. Her hand instinctively went to the rifle beside the door. Out here, caution kept you alive. A lone rider emerged from the gathering darkness, leading a limping horse. As he drew closer, Florence could make out a tall figure in a dusty hat, his movements careful and measured. He stopped a respectful distance from the house. "Madam, I apologize for the intrusion," he called out, his voice deep and carrying a hint of weariness. "My horse has gone lame and I saw your light. I'm hoping I might water him and check his hoof. I can pay for the trouble." Florence stood, keeping the rifle visible but not pointed at him. In the dim light, she could not make out his features clearly, but his posture suggested exhaustion rather than threat. Still, a woman alone could not afford to be careless. "You can use the trough by the barn," she said. "There's a lantern just inside the door." "Thank you, madam, I'm grateful." She watched as he led his horse to the trough, his movements gentle with the animal. He found the lantern and lit it with practiced ease, then bent to examine the horse's hoof in the golden circle of light. Florence stayed on the porch, the rifle across her lap, observing. The stranger worked quietly, eventually pulling something from the hoof. He spoke softly to the horse, stroking its neck. There was something in his careful handling of the animal that made Florence relax slightly. She had learned long ago that you could judge much about a man by how he treated horses and dogs. After a while, he led the horse around in a small circle, watching its gait. Seemingly satisfied, he returned to stand at a polite distance from the porch. "Stone wedged in pretty good," he said. "Should be fine now, but I'd prefer not to ride him hard tonight. Is there a place in town I could board him for the night? I'm willing to walk." "Town's 5 miles east," Florence said. "You would not make it before full dark." "I've walked in the dark before, madam." There was something in his voice, a quiet acceptance of hardship, that struck a chord in her. Florence hesitated. Every sensible bone in her body said to send him on his way. But there was also Thomas's voice in her memory, reminding her that they had received kindness from strangers when they first came to Arizona territory, and that kindness should be repaid when possible. "There's an old bunkhouse," she found herself saying. "It has not been used in a year, but it's weatherproof. You're welcome to it for the night if you need it." The stranger was quiet for a moment. "That's kind of you. I'd be obliged. My name is Daniel Dalton, Florence Gardner." She paused. "I'm a widow, Mr. Dalton. I'm telling you that so you understand my situation and will respect it." "Yes, madam. You have my word. I'll bed down in the bunkhouse and be on my way at first light. I won't trouble you." Florence showed him to the bunkhouse, staying in the doorway while he looked around the dusty space. There was an old cot with a thin mattress, a small stove, and not much else. "It's perfect, madam, thank you. There's a pump behind the barn for washing. I'll bring you some supper. You don't have to do that, nevertheless." She returned to the house and put together a plate of cold chicken, bread, and some canned peaches. It was more than she would have eaten alone, but hospitality had its own rules. When she brought it to the bunkhouse, Daniel Dalton was standing near the lantern, and she got her first clear look at him. He was perhaps 26 or 27, tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that were a startling light brown, almost amber. His face was weathered but not hard, and there was something in his expression that spoke of a man who had seen trouble but not become it. He had washed the trail dust from his face and hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Gardner. This is very kind." He took the plate with genuine gratitude in his voice. "You are welcome." Florence turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Dalton, I should tell you that there may be men watching this place. I have had offers to buy the ranch since my husband died. Not everyone has accepted my refusals gracefully. If you see anything concerning, I would appreciate you mentioning it." His expression shifted, a flash of something protective crossing his features. "How long ago did you lose your husband, if you don't mind me asking?" "9 days. I'm sorry for your loss." The words were simple but felt sincere. "And yes, I'll keep my eyes open." Florence nodded and left him to his meal. Back in the house, she checked that the doors were locked and the rifle was loaded. She sat by the window for a long time, watching the bunkhouse lamp eventually go dark, wondering if she had made a mistake in her loneliness and grief. But the night passed quietly, and when she woke before dawn, as was her habit, she saw Daniel Dalton already up, standing by the corral and looking out at the cattle in the near pasture. She watched him for a moment, curious despite herself. He stood very still, just looking, and there was something peaceful in his posture. She dressed and went out to begin her chores. The chickens needed feeding and eggs needed collecting. She was scattering grain when Daniel approached, leading his horse. "Morning, madam. I want to thank you again for your hospitality." "You are welcome. How's your horse?" "Good as new. That stone really had him bothered." He hesitated. "Mrs. Gardner, I couldn't help but notice that windmill is making a concerning sound. The bearing might be going bad." "And you have fence down on your eastern line." Florence felt her cheeks flush. "Yes, I know. I'll get to it." I wasn't criticizing, madam. I was going to offer to take a look at the windmill before I head out if you'd like. I worked on a big ranch up in Colorado for a few years. Got pretty good with mechanical things. Pride warred with practicality in Florence's chest. Pride said to refuse, to maintain her independence, to not accept charity. Practicality said that the windmill was beyond her current knowledge, and the cattle needed that water. I would appreciate that, she said finally. What's your fee? Just breakfast if you have it to spare. Otherwise, don't worry about it. I'll make breakfast. She left him to the windmill and went inside to cook, her mind churning. Daniel Dalton seemed genuine, but she had learned that seeming and being were sometimes different things. Still, she found herself making a larger breakfast than she had in days, biscuits and gravy and eggs and bacon. The cooking helped settle her nerves. When she called him in, Daniel washed up carefully before entering the house. He removed his hat and stood awkwardly by the door until she gestured to the table. The bearing was indeed going bad, he said as they ate. I greased it up good, which should help for a while, but you will need a replacement part eventually. They have them at any good hardware store. Thank you. I'll add it to my list. The list that was already overwhelming. If you don't mind me asking, madam, are you managing this ranch alone? Florence set down her fork. That's my business, Mr. Dalton. Yes, madam, it is. I apologize. He was quiet for a moment. I'm heading to California. Was supposed to meet up with a cattle drive, but I got delayed and they left without me. Now I'm just drifting, looking for work. I'm a fair hand with cattle and horses, and I know my way around ranch work. If you need help, I'd be willing to work for room and board and a small wage. Florence stared at him. Why would you offer that? Because you need help and I need work. Seems straightforward. You do not know anything about me. I could be a terrible person. A hint of a smile touched his mouth. You fed a stranger and gave him shelter. You're worried about being able to manage your ranch. You're wearing morning clothes, but you still got up before dawn to take care of your animals. I think I know enough. I cannot afford much in the way of wages. I do not need much. Florence's heart was pounding. It was too convenient, too perfect. And yet the desperation of her situation clawed at her. The autumn roundup was coming. She needed to get the cattle to market or she would not make it through the winter. She needed help, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Why? She asked again. Why help a widow you do not know? Daniel looked down at his plate, his expression growing distant. My mother was widowed when I was 15. My father died in a mining accident. We lost everything because she could not manage his claim alone and the vultures descended. She remarried within a year out of desperation, and the man she married was cruel. I ran away when I was 17, and I have been working ranches ever since. I know what it is to watch someone struggle with no good choices. If I can give you time to figure out your situation without pressure, I would like to do that. The raw honesty in his words struck Florence deeply. She saw the truth of old pain in his eyes. 2 weeks trial, she said finally. Room and board in the bunkhouse and $20 at the end if it works out. You step out of line once and you leave immediately. Yes, madam, that's fair. I'm serious, Mr. Dalton. I am vulnerable right now, and I will not be taken advantage of. I understand completely. You have my word that I will conduct myself with complete propriety. They shook hands across the table, and Florence felt a small measure of relief mixed with anxiety. She was trusting a stranger out of necessity, and she could only hope her instincts were correct. Daniel proved his worth immediately. After breakfast, he asked for a tour of the property and a full accounting of what needed doing. Florence showed him the fence line, the cattle scattered across the grazing land, the small barn that housed 2 horses and her milk cow, the equipment shed with its collection of tools in various states of repair. Your husband did good work, Daniel said, examining the fencing. "This is solid construction. Thomas was a good man." Florence's voice caught slightly. "I'm sure he was." They worked separately that first day, Daniel on the fence line and Florence on her usual chores. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, still wary, still uncertain. But he worked steadily and efficiently, and when evening came, he presented himself at the house only long enough to collect a plate of food before retreating to the bunkhouse. The pattern repeated the next day and the next. Daniel worked dawn until dusk, tackling the list of repairs and maintenance that had been building up. He was quiet and respectful, always keeping a proper distance. Florence began to relax incrementally, though she kept her guard up. On the fourth day, as they were mending fence together, Daniel asked, "How many head do you have?" 40, give or take. "Some are out in the far pasture." "You planning to sell this fall?" "I have to. I need the money to pay debts and make it through winter." "You will need help with the roundup and the drive to market." Florence had been trying not to think about that. "I know. I can do it, if you are still willing to have me around by then. That's almost 2 months away. I have nowhere else to be." Florence studied him, this stranger who had appeared when she most needed help. "Why are you really doing this, Mr. Dalton?" He was quiet for a long time, stretching wire. Finally, he said, "Maybe because nobody helped my mother. Maybe because I have spent years drifting without purpose and it feels good to be useful. Maybe because this is a good place and you deserve to keep it." He glanced at her. "Does the reason matter so much?" "I suppose not." But Florence thought it did matter. It mattered that he saw her not as prey but as a person worthy of help. It mattered that he asked for so little in return. It mattered that for the first time since Thomas died, she felt like she might actually survive this. As the days turned into weeks, an easy rhythm developed. They worked the ranch together, their conversations growing less guarded. Florence learned that Daniel had been born in Nevada, that he had worked ranches across 3 territories, that he was good with his hands and better with animals. He learned that she had come from Missouri with her parents, who had since moved to California, that she loved this harsh desert land despite its difficulties, that she had always wanted a large family but had only managed to get pregnant once, resulting in a daughter who had lived only 3 days. "That must have been hard," Daniel said quietly when she told him. "It was the worst thing I had ever experienced, until Thomas died." "Do you have other family nearby?" "No. Thomas had a brother in Texas, but they were not close. My parents write, but they are far away." She looked across the land. "This ranch is all I have. That is why I cannot lose it." "You will not lose it," Daniel said with quiet conviction. "Not if I have anything to say about it." His certainty should have seemed presumptuous, but instead it comforted her. For so long she had carried everything alone, even when Thomas was alive. To have someone else share the burden, even temporarily, felt like a gift. The town of Williams noticed Daniel's presence, of course. Nothing stayed secret for long in a small community. When Florence went in for supplies, the storekeeper's wife mentioned seeing your hired hand at the feed store. "He seems capable," the woman said, her tone carefully neutral. "He is. It is good you have help. A woman alone should not be managing a ranch." Florence bristled at the implication. "I am managing just fine." But the woman's words followed her home. The truth was that she was not managing alone anymore. Daniel had become essential to the operation in just a few short weeks. More than that, she realized with a start. She had begun to look forward to seeing him each morning, to their conversations over shared work, to the sound of another person moving around the property. The loneliness that had been suffocating her had lifted somewhat, and she was not sure how she felt about that. One evening in early September, a storm rolled in with dramatic suddenness. the way they did in high desert country. Florence was preparing supper when the sky opened up, rain hammering the roof. She looked out toward the bunkhouse, barely visible through the sheets of water, and saw Daniel running toward the barn to secure the animals. She grabbed an oilskin coat and ran out to help. Together they got the horses into stalls and calmed the frightened chickens. The storm raged around them, lightning splitting the sky. "We should wait it out here," Daniel shouted over the thunder. "It is not safe to cross the yard." They huddled in the barn, dripping and breathing hard. The animals shifted nervously in their stalls. Florence found herself very aware of Daniel's proximity in the confined space, the way his wet shirt clung to his shoulders, the water dripping from his hair. "Quite a storm," he said, his voice returning to normal volume as the thunder rolled away slightly. "They come fast this time of year." They stood in companionable silence, watching the rain. Florence felt a strange tightness in her chest, something she could not quite name. It had been so long since she had felt anything beyond grief and worry that this new sensation confused her. "Mrs. Gardner," Daniel said slowly, "I want you to know that I respect your mourning. I know you are still grieving your husband. But I also want you to know that I have come to care about what happens to you in this place, not just as an employee, but as someone who genuinely wants to see you succeed." Florence's breath caught. "Mr. Dalton, I do not think this is an appropriate conversation." "You are right. I apologize. I just wanted you to know that you can count on me for as long as you need." The storm passed as quickly as it had come. They ran back to their respective buildings through the thinning rain. Florence changed into dry clothes with trembling hands, Daniel's words echoing in her mind. She knew she should be offended, should maintain her proper widow's distance. But instead, she felt something else entirely, something warm and confusing and frightening. That night, she lay awake for a long time, thinking about Thomas, about grief, about loneliness, about the stranger who had become less strange with every passing day. She thought about how Daniel's quiet presence had become a comfort, how his steady reliability had given her space to breathe and heal. She thought about how she had caught herself smiling at something he said the other day, the first real smile since Thomas's death. Guilt washed over her. It had only been 6 weeks. 6 weeks since she had stood at Thomas's graveside. How could she be having these feelings already? What kind of wife was she? But another voice whispered that she was not a wife anymore. She was a widow, and widowhood was a strange, untethered state. She was only 24. Did she intend to wear black for the rest of her life? The questions chased themselves in circles until exhaustion finally claimed her. The next morning, Florence was careful to maintain a more formal distance. Daniel seemed to sense her withdrawal and matched it, speaking only of work matters. The easy camaraderie of previous weeks became strained. This awkwardness persisted for several days until an incident forced them back together. Florence was checking on the far pasture cattle alone when her horse spooked at a rattlesnake. The horse reared, and Florence, caught off guard, was thrown. She landed hard, the wind knocked from her lungs, pain shooting through her left wrist. She lay gasping for a moment, then slowly sat up. Her wrist was already swelling. The horse had bolted toward home. She was 2 miles from the house with an injury, and the sun was climbing toward its brutal midday height. Florence struggled to her feet, cradling her wrist, and began walking. Every step jarred the injury, sending fresh waves of pain up her arm. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trying not to panic. She had covered perhaps half a mile when she heard hoofbeats. Daniel appeared, riding hard, her returned horse trailing behind him. "I saw your horse come back alone," he said, dismounting quickly. His face was tight with concern. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Rattlesnake spooked her. I came off. My wrist." She held up her swelling arm. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Let me see." He examined her wrist with gentle, careful fingers. "I think it might be broken. We need to get you to the doctor in town. I can ride." "Not like this, you cannot." He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. "Hold onto the saddle horn with your good hand. I have got you." The ride back seemed to take forever. Florence was acutely aware of Daniel's solid presence behind her, the way his arms bracketed her protectively. The pain in her wrist throbbed with every stride, but she found herself leaning back slightly against Daniel's chest, drawing comfort from his steady support. At the house, he helped her down carefully. "I am going to hitch up the wagon to take you to town. Can you sit tight for a few minutes?" "Yes, thank you." The wagon ride to Williams was rough despite Daniel's best efforts to avoid the worst ruts. The doctor, an older man named Hendricks, confirmed the wrist was indeed broken and set it with efficient, practiced movements that still made Florence gasp with pain. He wrapped it firmly and fashioned a sling. "Keep it immobilized for at least 6 weeks, Dr. Hendricks said. "No heavy work. You are lucky it is a clean break." "I run a ranch," Florence said. "I have to work." "Then you will heal poorly and have problems with that wrist for the rest of your life." "Your choice, Mrs. Gardner." In the wagon heading home, Florence fought back tears of frustration. 6 weeks. How am I supposed to manage for 6 weeks? "You have me," Daniel said quietly. "I will handle the heavy work. You can supervise and do lighter tasks. You cannot do everything." "Then I will do what I can and the rest will wait. Florence." He stopped, seeming surprised at his use of her first name. "I am sorry, Mrs. Gardner, that was too familiar." "It is fine." And strangely it was. "Daniel, I cannot ask you to carry the entire ranch." "You are not asking. I am offering. Actually, I am insisting." He glanced at her. "You took me in when you had every reason to turn me away. You trusted me when you had no reason to trust anyone. Let me help you now." "Please." The sincerity in his voice undid something in Florence. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The next weeks were an exercise in patience and trust. Florence, frustrated by her limitations, had to watch Daniel do work that she felt should be her responsibility. But he never complained, never made her feel inadequate. He simply did what needed doing with quiet competence. He also insisted on helping with household tasks that became difficult with one hand. He chopped extra firewood, carried heavy pots, even helped with laundry on washing day. The enforced proximity wore away at the formal barriers between them. One evening, about 3 weeks after her injury, Florence attempted to cook a complex meal one-handed and made a mess of it. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the disaster, and felt tears of frustration building. Daniel appeared in the doorway. "I heard crashing. Are you all right?" "I am fine. I just made a mess. Let me help. You have done enough. You have been working since dawn." "Florence." There was that name again, and this time she did not correct him. "Let me help." Together they salvaged the meal, working side by side in the small kitchen. Daniel proved surprisingly capable at cooking, admitting that years of bunkhouse living had taught him to fend for himself. "Where did you learn to make biscuits like this?" Florence asked, sampling one. "A cook on a ranch in Colorado took pity on me and taught me a few things. Said no man should be completely helpless in a kitchen." They ate together at the table, something they had started doing more often since her injury. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. "What do you want, Daniel?" Florence asked. "Long term, I mean. You said you have been drifting. Do you want to keep drifting?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think I did. Freedom felt important after everything with my mother and stepfather. But lately, I have been thinking that maybe drifting is just another word for running. Maybe what I really want is a place to belong. And where would that place be? His amber eyes met hers. I am beginning to think I might have found it. The air between them felt charged. Florence's heart was racing. Daniel, I do not know if I am ready for what you are implying. I know, I am not asking you to be ready, I am just being honest. He stood and began clearing dishes. I should go. Thank you for supper. After he left, Florence sat in the gathering darkness, her mind whirling. She could not deny the feelings growing in her heart. Somewhere along the way, Daniel Dalton had become more than a hired hand, more than a stranger who had stayed. He had become someone she looked forward to seeing, someone whose opinion mattered, someone who made her feel alive in a way she had not felt in a long time. But Thomas had only been dead for 2.5 months. Was it wrong to feel this way? Was she betraying his memory? That night, she took out her wedding photograph, studying Thomas's serious face. They had been happy in their quiet way. He had been a good man, a good husband. But if she was honest, their marriage had been more partnership than passion. They had cared for each other, respected each other, built a life together. But had she ever felt this flutter in her stomach when Thomas looked at her? Had her pulse ever raced at his nearness? She felt guilty for even thinking it, but the truth was that what she felt for Daniel was different than what she had felt for Thomas. More intense, more alive, more frightening. The next morning, the land speculator Pemberton appeared again, this time with another man in a suit. "Mrs. Gardner," Pemberton said, not bothering with pleasantries. "This is Mr. Thornton from the bank. He has some concerns about your loan." Florence felt her stomach drop. Thomas had taken a small loan the previous year to expand the herd. She had been making payments, but with her injury, she had missed the last one. Thornton spoke in a dry, businesslike tone. "You are currently in arrears, Mrs. Gardner. Given your circumstances, the bank is concerned about the viability of continued lending. We are prepared to offer a settlement. Sell the ranch to Mr. Pemberton at a fair price, and we will consider the loan satisfied. The ranch is not for sale. Mrs. Gardner, be reasonable. You are injured. You are alone. How do you expect to manage a ranch and repay your debts? She is not alone." Florence turned to see Daniel approaching, his expression hard. "And who are you?" Pemberton demanded. "Daniel Dalton. I work here. Mrs. Gardner has a full working operation and will have cattle to sell this fall. The loan will be repaid." Thornton looked between them. "You are the hired man. And you think you can guarantee a successful season?" "I do not think. I know. Now I believe Mrs. Gardner asked you to leave." Pemberton's face reddened. "This is not over." "Yes, it is," Florence said, finding her voice. "Get off my land." They waited until the two men had driven away before speaking. "Thank you," Florence said, "though you may have made things more complicated." "They were already complicated. They are trying to intimidate you into selling. It is unconscionable." Daniel's jaw was tight with anger. "When is the loan payment due?" 2 weeks. "And how much do you need?" Florence told him the amount. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "If we sell a few head now, could you make the payment and still have enough for winter?" "Possibly. But we would have to get them to market quickly, and I am in no condition to help with a drive." "I can do it. I will take 4 or 5 head to the stockyard in Flagstaff. It is only about 30 miles. I can make it there and back in 3 days." "Daniel, that is too much to ask." "You are not asking. I am volunteering." He looked at her steadily. "Florence, I am invested in your success. Let me do this." Florence felt emotion welling up. "Why do you care so much?" "I think you know why." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Florence did know. She had known for weeks, maybe longer. Daniel cared about her, not just as an employer, not just as a woman who needed help, but as a woman he had feelings for. And heaven help her, she had feelings for him too. "All right," she said quietly. "Take the 5 best steers. Get the best price you can. And Daniel, be careful, always. He left the next morning, driving 5 head of cattle. Florence watched him go with anxiety knotting her stomach. She trusted him, but anything could happen on the trail. She spent the next 3 days restless and worried, unable to settle to any task for long. When he finally returned on the evening of the 3rd day, dusty and exhausted but safe, Florence felt relief flood through her so intensely it almost brought her to her knees. "Got a good price," Daniel said, handing her a pouch of money. "Should be enough for the loan payment with some left over." Florence counted it out, tears threatening. "This is more than enough. Daniel, you did it. We did it." He swayed slightly, exhaustion catching up with him. "You need food and rest. Come inside. I will not hear any argument." She fed him stew and fresh bread, watching as he ate with the focused intensity of someone who had been working too hard. When he finished, he looked at her with those amber eyes, and something in his expression made her heart clench. "Florence, I need to tell you something. All right. These past months, working here, getting to know you, I have developed feelings I did not expect. I know your situation. I know you are in mourning. I know you might not be ready for anything beyond what we have now. But I also know that I cannot keep pretending that I am just a hired hand doing a job. I care about you, deeply. And if there is any chance that someday you might feel the same way, I want to be here for that. If there is not, I will still help you through the fall roundup because I said I would, but then I will move on so I do not make things awkward for you." Florence's breath caught. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he must surely hear it. "Daniel, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything right now. I just needed you to know." But Florence found that she did know what to say. The words came from somewhere deep and true. "I feel the same way. I did not want to. I felt guilty even thinking it, but I cannot help how I feel. When you were gone these past 3 days, I was terrified something would happen to you. And I realized that what I feel is not just gratitude or friendship. It is more than that." Daniel stood slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Florence, I need you to be sure. I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated. I am sure. I am also scared. Thomas has only been dead 3 months. People will talk. They will say I am unseemly or worse." "You care what they say," Florence thought about it. "Not as much as I care about being honest about my feelings." Daniel crossed the room to stand in front of her, close but not touching. "I do not want to rush you. We can take this as slow as you need. I have been living in limbo since Thomas died, maybe even before, maybe for years. I do not want to live that way anymore." Florence reached up with her good hand and touched his face, feeling the rasp of stubble, the warmth of his skin. "I want to feel alive again." Daniel covered her hand with his, then slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, and sent electricity through Florence's entire body. She leaned into it, her hand sliding into his hair. The kiss deepened, and Florence felt years of loneliness and grief beginning to crack open, making space for something new. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks." "I wish you had," he laughed softly. "Are you sure about this, about us?" "I am sure that I have feelings for you. I am sure that I want to see where this leads. I am sure that life is short and uncertain and happiness should not be squandered when it is offered. Beyond that, can anyone be sure of anything? I suppose not." He kissed her again softly. "I should go. It is late and people already talk. Let them talk. Florence." His voice was serious. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly. I do not want anyone to question your reputation or make your life harder. So I am going to go back to the bunkhouse, and tomorrow we will figure out how to navigate this. All right." She knew he was right, but she did not want him to leave. Still, she nodded. "All right, but Daniel, thank you for everything." "My pleasure." He kissed her hand, then left, closing the door softly behind him. Florence stood in the middle of her kitchen, touching her lips, feeling like she had just stepped off a cliff and discovered she could fly. The next morning, they sat together over coffee and discussed their situation with the practicality necessary for survival in the harsh territory. "I do not want to hide how I feel," Florence said, "but I also know that propriety matters, especially for a woman. If I am seen as improper, it could affect my ability to do business, to be taken seriously." "Then we will be circumspect," Daniel said. "In public, I am your hired hand. In private, we can be honest. For now. But Florence, I need you to know that my intentions are serious. When the time is right, when you are ready, and when enough time has passed that it would not scandalize the community, I want to marry you, if you will have me." Florence felt warmth spread through her chest. "You are talking about the future like you plan to be here for it." "I am here for as long as you want me. Forever, if you will let me. Forever is a long time. Not long enough, I think." They maintained their discretion in public, but in private, their relationship deepened. They worked the ranch together, their partnership now underlaid with affection and growing love. In the evenings, Daniel would come to the house for supper, and they would talk for hours, sharing their histories, their hopes, their fears. Florence learned about Daniel's difficult childhood, his violent stepfather, his escape to the drifter's life. She learned about his love of horses, his dream of someday having his own small ranch, his feeling of never quite belonging anywhere until now. Daniel learned about Florence's lonely childhood as an only child in a struggling farm family, her parents' decision to seek better opportunities in the West, her marriage to Thomas that had been more pragmatic than passionate. He learned about the baby she had lost, the grief that still lived in quiet corners of her heart. "You want children?" Florence asked one evening. "Very much. Do you?" "I am afraid to. Losing Sarah nearly destroyed me. What if it happened again? Then we would grieve together." "But Florence, you cannot let fear stop you from living." She knew he was right. Fear had been driving her for so long, fear of loss, fear of judgment, fear of vulnerability. But Daniel made her feel brave, her wrist healed slowly. Dr. Hendricks pronounced himself satisfied with her progress when she returned for a checkup in early October. By that time, the relationship between Florence and Daniel was an open secret in Williams. Some people disapproved, thinking it too soon after Thomas's death. Others understood that life on the frontier did not allow for extended mourning periods. A widow needed support, one way or another. The fall roundup arrived. With Florence's wrist mostly healed and Daniel's expertise, they gathered the cattle and prepared for the drive to market. Florence hired 2 temporary hands to help, young men from town looking for work. Together, the 4 of them drove the cattle to the stockyards in Flagstaff. It was hard work, long days in the saddle, cold nights sleeping on the ground. But Florence felt more alive than she had in years. She was doing what needed to be done, with people she trusted, working toward a goal she could achieve. The cattle sold well. After paying off the bank loan and the temporary hands, Florence had enough left for winter expenses and a little saved. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt financially secure on the trip back to Williams, riding beside Daniel under a sky full of stars. Florence felt a profound sense of peace. She had survived. The ranch was hers, free and clear. The future stretched before her, full of possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked. "I am thinking that 4 months ago I thought my life was over, and now I feel like it is just beginning. It is beginning, for both of us." When they reached the ranch, Florence asked Daniel to come inside. He followed her into the house, and she turned to face him. "I have been thinking," she said, "about propriety and mourning and what people think, and I have decided that I have spent enough of my life worrying about those things. I love you, Daniel Dalton. I want you in my life, not as a hired hand, not as something we have to hide, but as my partner and eventually my husband. If you still want that." "If I still want that," Daniel laughed, pulling her close. "Florence, I have wanted that since about a week after I met you. I just did not think I had the right to hope for it. You have every right, so here is what I propose. We get married this winter, a small ceremony, nothing fancy. We run this ranch together. We build a life together. What do you say?" "I say yes. Absolutely yes." He kissed her deeply, and Florence felt the last of her reservations fall away. They were married in December 1882, in a simple ceremony at the church in Williams. A few neighbors attended, including some who approved and some who were simply curious. Florence wore a blue dress instead of white, practical but pretty. Daniel wore his best shirt and looked nervous and happy. The minister, an elderly man who had presided over Thomas's funeral just months before, spoke about second chances and the gift of new beginnings. He did not judge Florence for moving on quickly. Instead, he blessed their union and wished them well. After the ceremony, they held a small gathering at the ranch. Some of the neighbors brought food, and there was music and even some dancing. Florence felt Thomas's absence as a gentle ache rather than a sharp pain. She thought he would have approved of Daniel, would have wanted her to be happy. As the last guests departed and the sun set over the desert, Daniel pulled Florence close. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Dalton?" "It feels right. How does it feel to be a married man and a ranch owner? Like I finally found where I belong." They stood together in the doorway of what was now their shared home, looking out at the land that was now theirs together. The path forward would not always be easy. The desert was harsh, the work was hard, and life was uncertain. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference. That night, in the room that had been Florence's alone for so long, they came together as husband and wife. The joining was tender and passionate, filled with the joy of new love and the comfort of deep connection. Afterwards, lying in Daniel's arms, Florence felt a completeness she had never experienced before. "I never knew it could be like this," she whispered. "Like what? This feeling?" "Like everything finally makes sense." Daniel kissed her forehead. "I know exactly what you mean." Winter passed in a blur of work and happiness. They settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Daniel proved to be a thoughtful partner, always considering Florence's opinions, never trying to take over or diminish her role in running the ranch. Florence found herself opening up in ways she never had with Thomas, sharing her deepest thoughts and dreams. In February, Florence realized she was pregnant. The discovery brought a complex mix of emotions, joy intertwined with fear. When she told Daniel, he swept her into his arms, his face alight with happiness. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Daniel, I am scared." "What if something goes wrong again? Then we will face it together. But let us not borrow trouble from the future. Right now, you are healthy and our baby is growing. Let us celebrate that." Dr. Hendricks confirmed the pregnancy and pronounced Florence in good health. He was kind about her fears, understanding given her history, and promised to check on her regularly. As her pregnancy progressed, Florence found that Daniel's optimism helped temper her anxiety. He was excited and attentive, taking on more of the heavy work without being asked, making sure she rested and ate well. The ranch thrived under their joint management. They added to the herd gradually, being careful not to overextend. They made improvements to the property, fixing up the house, expanding the barn. Daniel proved to have a good head for business, and together they made decisions that strengthened their operation, In late summer, Florence went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when the fear threatened to overwhelm her. But Daniel stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with strong lungs and dark hair, Florence wept with relief and joy. Daniel held his son with tears streaming down his face, looking at Florence with such love and gratitude that she felt her heart might burst. They named him Thomas Daniel Dalton, honoring both the past and the present. "Hello, little Thomas," Daniel whispered to the baby. "Welcome to the world. You are so loved." Florence watched her husband with their son and felt a profound sense of rightness. This was her family now, this man who had been a stranger less than a year ago, and this tiny person they had created together. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved the ranch and the animals. When he was 2, Florence became pregnant again, and this time the fear was less acute. She gave birth to twin girls, Rebecca and Sarah, named for Daniel's mother and Florence's lost first daughter. The ranch continued to prosper. They expanded gradually, hiring permanent hands as the operation grew. Daniel proved to be a fair but firm boss, and they attracted good workers who stayed for years. Florence found unexpected joy in motherhood the second time around. With Daniel's support and 3 healthy children, she healed from the trauma of losing her first baby. She and Daniel talked openly about their children, about their fears and hopes, about the kind of parents they wanted to be. On their 5th anniversary, Daniel gave Florence a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For writing down our story," he said. "So someday our children and grandchildren can know how we found each other." Florence ran her hand over the smooth leather. "It is a good story, is it not?" "The best story. A stranger rode up to a widow's ranch and somehow they built a life together. You were not just any stranger. You were the stranger who stayed forever." Daniel pulled her close. "Forever is not long enough with you." They stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard, the desert stretching endlessly around them. The life they had built was not always easy, but it was theirs, forged from grief and chance and the courage to embrace unexpected love. As the sun set over the Arizona landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Florence reflected on how much had changed since that terrible day when Thomas died. She had thought her life was ending, but instead, it had been transforming. She had needed comfort from strangers, and the universe had sent her Daniel, the cowboy who had stayed. More children followed. Another son, James, and then a surprise late-in-life daughter named Margaret when Florence was 38. They filled the house with noise and laughter and love. The ranch grew to become one of the most successful in the area, known for its quality cattle and fair dealing. Thomas, the eldest, eventually took over management of the ranch when Daniel and Florence were ready to step back. Rebecca married a neighboring rancher's son, combining 2 properties into a larger operation. Sarah became a teacher in Williams, bringing education to the growing town. James went east to study veterinary medicine, then returned to care for animals throughout the territory. Margaret, the youngest and most adventurous, eventually moved to California but visited often with her own growing family. Through it all, Daniel and Florence remained devoted to each other. Their love, born from desperate need and unexpected connection, deepened with each passing year. They worked together, raised their family together, and grew old together. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Thomas, now a married man with children of his own, made a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. who taught us that love can come from unexpected places, that second chances are real, and that family is built on more than blood. It is built on commitment, respect, and choosing each other every single day. Florence, now 54 with silver threading through her hair, looked at Daniel, 60 with laugh lines around his eyes, and felt the same flutter in her stomach she had felt decades ago. He took her hand and squeezed it, and she knew he felt it too. That night, after all the guests had gone home or retired to spare rooms, Florence and Daniel sat together on their porch, just as they had done thousands of times before. "You ever think about that day I rode up?" Daniel asked. "How different things could have been, all the time. If your horse had not gone lame, if I had turned you away, if I had been too proud to accept your help, so many small choices that led us here. I believe we were meant to find each other. Call it fate or providence or just luck, but I believe it." Florence leaned her head on his shoulder. "So do I. You were what I needed when I needed it most, a stranger who became everything. You were what I needed too, a purpose, a home, a reason to stop drifting." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their first kiss, and every moment since. Daniel spoke quietly. "I love you, Florence. I have loved you since the beginning, and I will love you until the end." "I love you too. Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me." As they sat together, hands intertwined, Florence thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about Thomas, her first husband, who had given her a start in this harsh land. She thought about grief and loss, and the terrifying vulnerability of opening one's heart again. She thought about the community that had judged and supported them in equal measure. She thought about their children, the legacy of love they were leaving behind. But mostly, she thought about the man beside her, the stranger who had appeared when she needed comfort most and had chosen to stay forever. Their love story was not conventional, born as it was from tragedy and need. But it was real and deep and true, and it had given both of them a life neither could have imagined. The desert night grew cool, and they eventually went inside to the warmth of their home. In the bedroom they had shared for 3 decades, they prepared for sleep with the comfortable routine of long marriage. Daniel checked the window latches. Florence turned down the bed. They moved around each other with the unconscious choreography of people who knew each other completely. In bed, Florence curled into Daniel's arms, fitting against him perfectly as she always had. His heartbeat was steady under her ear, a sound more familiar to her than her own breathing. "Good night, my love," she whispered. "Good night, Florence, sweet dreams." She closed her eyes, safe and content, surrounded by the life they had built together. Outside, the desert stretched vast and dark, full of dangers and hardships. But inside this house, there was only warmth and love and the profound satisfaction of a life well lived. Florence Gardner had been a widow who needed comfort from strangers. Daniel Dalton had been a drifting cowboy who needed a place to belong. Together, they had built something neither could have achieved alone: a family, a legacy, and a love that would endure long after they were gone. Their grandchildren would tell their grandchildren about the stranger who rode up one August evening and stayed forever. The story would become family legend, embellished and romanticized with each telling. But the core truth would remain. 2 lonely people had found each other in the vastness of the Arizona territory and had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, and together over alone. As Florence drifted off to sleep, she felt Daniel's arms tighten around her slightly, even in sleep unwilling to let her go. She smiled in the darkness. This man, her husband, her partner, her great love, had transformed her life in ways she could never have predicted. He had been a stranger once, but he had become her home. And in the quiet of that night, with the desert wind whispering against the windows and the stars wheeling overhead, the story of the widow and the cowboy continued, not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the simple, profound act of two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, for the rest of their lives. The ranch would stand for generations, passing from Thomas and his siblings to their children and beyond. The land would be worked by countless hands, the cattle would continue to graze the endless acres, and the house would fill with new voices and new stories. But the foundation would always be the love between Florence and Daniel, the widow and the stranger, whose unexpected meeting on a lonely August evening in 1882 had created something that would outlast them both. And so the story ended, not with tragedy or uncertainty, but with the quiet triumph of love found, life lived fully, and a family built on the bedrock of two hearts that chose to beat as one. Florence Gardner Dalton and Daniel Dalton lived out their days on the land they loved, surrounded by children and grandchildren, secure in the knowledge that they had found what so many seek but few discover: true partnership, abiding love, and a home not just of place but of heart. The widow had needed comfort from strangers. The cowboy had been the stranger who stayed forever. And in staying, he had given her everything she needed and more than she had ever dreamed possible. Their love story, born from grief and chance, had become something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the healing power of love and the courage required to embrace it when it appears, however unexpected its arrival might be.